A daycare worker, a trusted figure, a guardian of innocence. But behind the walls of a Pennsylvania home, she and her accomplice allegedly carried out one of the most nightmarish betrayals imaginable. The victims, the most vulnerable among us. The accused, a young woman and her older companion who claim they were too intoxicated to remember their crimes. But the evidence tells a different story. Shocking, disturbing, and deeply unsettling. This is a case that will haunt you long after the details unfold. Tonight, we uncover the grim reality of what really happened inside that house and why prosecutors believe these two should never see the light of day again. Viewer discretion is strongly advised. Before we dive deeper into this heartbreaking story, we ask you to support the channel by hitting that subscribe button for more true crime content like this. Criminal Echoes is committed to bringing you the latest updates and deepest dives into the stories that matter, stories that deserve to be told. Your subscription helps us keep bringing the truth to light. Now let's get back to the case at hand. In the quiet, suburban township of Middlesex, Pennsylvania, a story that defies comprehension has emerged, a story that has left the community reeling in disbelief. At the center of it all, 24-year-old Morgan Rothenhofer, a former daycare worker, and her much older accomplice, 42-year-old Jamie Sayers, stand accused of unspeakable crimes. The pair's alleged acts are as disturbing as they are depraved, but the horrors don't stop there. These two didn't just commit these crimes in secret. They filmed them. The question that haunts investigators and the public alike is, how did two people, seemingly trusted by society, end up committing such heinous acts? Rothenhofer, a young woman whose profession was meant to nurture and protect children, is now facing a mountain of felony charges, each one more shocking than the last. Prosecutors allege she participated in the sexual assault of an 8-year-old child, filming the crime as it unfolded. The chilling details are further compounded by the horrifying fact that Sayers, a man already known to have a history of possessing child pornography, is linked to this crime. And he too faces the same shocking charges. The pair's arrest wasn't an immediate one. The investigation began months before, when a cloud data storage company contacted law enforcement with a tip that would unravel this sickening web. This company, alerting authorities to criminal sexual abuse material, CSAM, linked to Sayers' online activities, provided investigators with a crucial lead, one that would expose the disturbing depths of his and Rothenhofer's twisted actions. However, as the investigation would reveal, this wasn't the first time Sayers had been involved in these crimes. His digital footprint dated back as far as 2006, revealing years of child abuse material stored on his devices, a sickening history he would eventually admit to. But what makes this case all the more baffling is the excuse Rothenhofer and Sayers gave for their actions: drug and alcohol intoxication. According to police reports, Rothenhofer confessed that she was very drunk and under the influence of cocaine and Adderall during the filming. Both of them, they claim, could not remember the event clearly. But the footage speaks for itself. In the wake of their arrest, the community was left with more questions than answers. How could two people entrusted with the care of children commit such unspeakable acts? What drove them to this point of no return? The story begins on a chilling winter day in February. At least, that's when authorities believe the horror unfolded. The 8-year-old victim, whose identity has been protected for her safety, was allegedly coerced into performing unspeakable acts at the hands of Morgan Rothenhofer and Jamie Sayers. This wasn't a random encounter. It was a calculated, premeditated crime, committed within the walls of Sayers' own home. But the true nightmare didn't end there. Rothenhofer, a young woman who once cared for children at a daycare, and Sayers, a man with a disturbing history of child pornography possession, didn't just carry out the abuse, they filmed it. It wasn't just a crime of violence, it was a crime of evidence, a chilling memento of their depravity. And as if the crime itself weren't heinous enough, they allowed this footage to live on. Sayers, who had been collecting such material for years, filmed the abuse using cloud-based services, uploading and storing it as if it were nothing more than a grotesque souvenir. It was the digital world that would ultimately bring them to justice. Authorities weren't the ones to first discover the abuse. It was a cloud data storage company that sent a tip to law enforcement after detecting suspicious material linked to Sayers' online activities. This seemingly innocuous alert would be the key that unlocked a long-buried crime. It's a chilling thought. How many others might have been subjected to similar horrors had that company not flagged the material? Once the tip-off was made, investigators wasted no time. They dug into Sayers' history, uncovering a treasure trove of evidence that dated back over a decade. Among the most haunting discoveries were images and videos spanning from as early as 2006, showcasing the true scale of his depravity. His confession to police was equally chilling. He knew what he had done was wrong, but couldn't stop himself. He admitted his attraction to children, explaining how he had used cloud services like Synchronous to download and distribute his vile collection. But what about Rothenhofer? How deep was her involvement? The most unsettling detail came from Rothenhofer's own words. When questioned, she told police she had been so intoxicated during the incident that she couldn't recall the specifics. Very drunk, she admitted. Cocaine and Adderall, she claimed, clouded her judgment that day. But the footage they had uncovered painted a different picture. One where, despite her claims of memory loss, Rothenhofer was fully aware of what she was doing. And Sayers? He too explained his actions by blaming his addiction, admitting that his need for pornography had spiraled out of control. But the question remained, was this all truly the result of intoxication? Or was there a darker, more calculated nature to their actions? Investigators suspected that there was much more to uncover. And as the case unfolded, they learned that the abuse of the 8-year-old was not an isolated incident. As the investigation progressed, it became increasingly clear that Rothenhofer and Sayers weren't just two individuals acting in isolation. They were part of a much darker world, a world where the innocent were exploited, filmed, and left to suffer. The true scale of the crime was still unknown, but the evidence they had gathered pointed to a systematic pattern of abuse that had spanned for years. The question remained, how many victims were out there, and how many more would have been hurt if this digital discovery hadn't occurred? The connection between Morgan Rothenhofer and Jamie Sayers is more than just that of two criminals. It's a web of manipulation, power, and years of psychological control. On the surface, Rothenhofer, a 24-year-old daycare worker, seemed like any other young woman living a normal life. But the truth is far more disturbing. Rothenhofer had known Sayers for much of her life. Their relationship wasn't born from a fleeting encounter or a chance meeting. It was built over the course of nearly 2 decades, beginning when she was just a teenager. According to Sayers, their history stretched back 15 years. And while Rothenhofer claimed she'd known him since she was 14, the unsettling nature of their past relationship was hard to ignore. Sayers, by his own admission, had been a part of her life since she was a vulnerable child. And that's where the darkness began to take root. Could this long-standing connection have been more than just a friendship? Was this a carefully orchestrated grooming process that stretched years? A slow erosion of boundaries that would eventually lead to the twisted crime they both stand accused of today? In interviews with police, Sayers confirmed what many had suspected, that their relationship went beyond mere friendship. Rothenhofer, he claimed, was someone he had known intimately for years. And in some sickening sense, he had helped shape her into the person she had become. There were whispers in the investigation of emotional manipulation, of a toxic and controlling influence that Sayers held over Rothenhofer. Over the years, he may have cultivated a relationship built on power and dependency, the kind of relationship that could entangle someone in a way that made it difficult to break free. But Rothenhofer's own statements during the investigation further complicated the narrative. She admitted to police that, at the time of the crimes, she was deeply intoxicated. So much so that she couldn't clearly recall the details of the abuse she and Sayers had filmed. She was very drunk, she said, and under the influence of cocaine and Adderall. For a moment, the audience might wonder, was Rothenhofer a mere participant, swept up in a situation she didn't fully comprehend? Or was she an active player in the crime, a willing accomplice whose actions were premeditated, even if shrouded in the fog of drugs? Sayers, however, seemed to hold less ambiguity in his words. His confession to investigators was damning. He admitted to being sexually attracted to children, acknowledging that what he had done was wrong, but that he had felt powerless to stop it. His addiction to pornography, particularly child pornography, had spiraled into a dangerous obsession that led him down a path of increasingly horrific behavior. His electronic devices, once seized by authorities, revealed a shocking collection of CSAM dating back to 2006. Yet even with his dark history laid bare, one question looms large. What role did Rothenhofer play in these crimes? Was she complicit from the beginning, or was she a victim of Sayers' manipulation and influence? This complex dynamic between the two accused individuals creates a disturbing narrative, a story of trust betrayed and power abused. As investigators continued to dig deeper into their relationship, they began to realize that this was not a simple case of two people caught in a fleeting act of depravity. This was something much darker, a manipulation that had been years in the making. If Sayers had been grooming Rothenhofer for years, had he been building the foundation for this crime all along? Was Rothenhofer a victim of Sayers' psychological manipulation? Or was she a willing accomplice drawn into his world of abuse and exploitation? As the case continues to unfold, the true nature of their relationship remains a key piece of the puzzle. And as the legal proceedings move forward, the question that lingers in the air is, was Rothenhofer simply a pawn in Sayers' depraved game? Or was she, too, a predator in her own right, complicit in the abuse and the filmed horrors they created together? In cases like these, the true weight of the crime is not just in the actions of the perpetrators, but in the lives irrevocably altered by their cruelty. The 8-year-old victim at the center of this horrifying story is not just a name in court documents. She is a symbol of innocence shattered. Her face is unknown, her identity protected, but the emotional toll she has endured is unimaginable. She was a child, trusting, vulnerable, and exposed to an unthinkable betrayal by those who were meant to nurture and protect her. The psychological scars left by such abuse will haunt her for a lifetime. The disturbing truth is, this young girl was not just another victim. She was filmed, her pain and suffering immortalized on a recording that would later serve as damning evidence in a criminal investigation. But what does that do to a child? What kind of impact does it have on a person's soul when their most private, intimate moments are taken from them, exploited, and made permanent in the eyes of their abusers? The trauma is beyond comprehension. And as investigators continue to piece together the full scope of the crime, they fear that this one child may not be the only victim in Sayers and Rothenhofer's dark world. The chilling discovery of child sexual abuse material, CSAM, on Sayers' devices paints a grim picture of a man with an insatiable hunger for exploitation. This wasn't just a single act of abuse, it was a systematic pattern of victimization. And while the charges against Rothenhofer and Sayers are focused on the assault of one child, investigators believe there may be others who have yet to come forward. Could there be more victims waiting to be heard? The idea that there may be other children whose suffering has yet to be fully realized adds another layer of horror to an already unimaginable crime. But this case doesn't just affect the victim, it rips through the very fabric of the community. In a town like Middlesex, where neighbors know each other by name, where children are entrusted to the care of daycare workers, the impact is profound. How could a woman, a young woman no less, be capable of such cruelty? How could someone who was supposed to safeguard children be responsible for one of the most unforgivable acts against them? The emotional reverberations are felt not only by the victim and her family, but by every parent, every teacher, every person who trusted Rothenhofer and believed she was there to help. Families in the community, who had no idea what was going on behind closed doors, are now left to grapple with the weight of their trust being betrayed. The fear that their children might have been exposed to similar dangers is a quiet, gnawing worry that continues to haunt parents as they attempt to process the horror. The idea that these two adults were capable of such manipulation, using their roles as trusted individuals to harm children, has shaken the very foundation of what it means to feel safe. For Rothenhofer, there are no simple explanations. She may claim intoxication as an excuse for her actions, but the toll this crime has taken on the victim is real and irrevocable. Can anyone truly believe that she was an innocent bystander to Sayers' twisted agenda? Or was she as much a predator as he, a willing participant who let the darkness consume her? What makes this case even more tragic is the complex nature of abuse itself. Many will wonder, was Rothenhofer simply manipulated by Sayers, or did she too become a willing participant in these horrors? The blurred lines between victim and perpetrator are what make this case even more unsettling. Rothenhofer, a woman who once nurtured children, is now being accused of subjecting one of the most vulnerable members of society to the kind of abuse that leaves scars far beyond the physical. The emotional weight of the situation is staggering, and as the investigation continues, one question remains: how many lives have been irreparably shattered, and how many more will bear the psychological burden of what has unfolded here? The path to uncovering the full scope of this horrific crime was not an easy one. It began not with a witness coming forward or a confession, but with a digital trace, a single, anonymous tip that would unravel the darkness hiding behind closed doors. It was a cloud data storage company tasked with storing personal information that first alerted authorities to a troubling discovery. This company's routine scans had detected suspicious material linked to the accounts of Jamie Sayers. The tip, though vague, would become the catalyst for a painstaking investigation that would reveal the unimaginable. As investigators dug deeper into Sayers' online activities, they found themselves confronted with an avalanche of evidence, each discovery more disturbing than the last. The material was more than just files. It was a testament to years of exploitation. Sayers, it appeared, had been collecting child sexual abuse material, CSAM, for over a decade, with files dating back to 2006. Police found hundreds of images and videos stored on his devices, each one a chilling reminder of his insatiable thirst for pornography involving minors. The depth of his depravity was clear. He had created an archive, a collection, meticulously stored, perhaps to satisfy a craving that only grew darker with time. But the digital evidence didn't stop there. Sayers' use of cloud services, particularly a platform called Synchronous, revealed his method of distribution, uploading and sharing the material with others who shared his twisted desires. This wasn't just a private collection. It was part of a network, a larger world where exploitation was commodified and spread. What made the evidence even more damning was the fact that Sayers had confessed. To investigators, he openly admitted to his addiction, his attraction to children, and his understanding that what he was doing was both immoral and illegal. He had no defense, no attempt to justify his actions, only the grim acknowledgement that he was a prisoner to his own urges. Yet, the evidence uncovered wasn't just digital. It was physical. Authorities also found disturbing items in Sayers' home that further painted a grotesque portrait of his perversion. Among the most horrifying discoveries were printed and framed photographs of young girls in bikinis displayed on the walls of his house. These images, seemingly innocent at first glance, were part of a sickening collection that blurred the line between fantasy and reality. But this, too, was a symptom of Sayers' obsession, a man who had built his world around these images, a world where innocence was twisted and perverted into something vile. Rothenhofer, too, had left her mark on the investigation. When questioned by police, she claimed to have no memory of the events surrounding the filmed abuse of the 8-year-old child. She told officers that she was very drunk and under the influence of cocaine and Adderall during the filming. But while her intoxication might explain a lack of clear memory, it did nothing to absolve her from the actions captured in the video. Investigators were left to question the reliability of her claim. Could she have been coerced by Sayers, manipulated into participating in the abuse, or was she a willing accomplice? The most chilling discovery of all, however, came when police realized that the abuse wasn't an isolated incident. The evidence on Sayers' devices told a different story, one of repeated exploitation, of children victimized by Sayers' actions, of videos and images that spanned years. But the charge for which they were ultimately arrested centered around the abuse of a single child, the 8-year-old girl filmed in Sayers' home. While law enforcement feared there were other victims, they had only solid proof of this one crime, at least for now. Despite the damning evidence, there remained a question that loomed over the entire investigation. How did this all stay hidden for so long? Why had no one noticed the signs? Sayers had been living in the community for years, appearing to lead a normal life, even as his digital footprint revealed the extent of his horrors. Rothenhofer had been working at a daycare, a position that required background checks that at the time seemed to clear her. But now everything had changed. With the discovery of the videos, the photos, and the chilling admissions from both Sayers and Rothenhofer, the case was far from over. It was just beginning. As the investigation continued, the horrifying truth about the extent of Sayers and Rothenhofer's involvement in these crimes would slowly come to light. But for now, one thing was clear. The evidence spoke volumes, and it was only a matter of time before the full weight of their actions came crashing down. As the legal proceedings unfold, one thing is clear. The severity of the charges against Morgan Rothenhofer and Jamie Sayers cannot be overstated. If convicted, both could face life-altering consequences, potentially spending the rest of their lives behind bars. And with the evidence mounting against them, it seems almost inevitable. But what does the legal landscape look like for two people accused of such horrific crimes? To provide clarity, we turn to criminal defense attorney and former prosecutor Matt Menino, who brings decades of legal experience to this case. According to Menino, the charges against Rothenhofer and Sayers are among the most serious a person can face, particularly when the victim is a child. The list of charges includes rape of a child, aggravated indecent assault, involuntary deviant sexual intercourse, and the filming and photographing of a child in sexual acts, all felony offenses that carry staggering penalties. For Sayers, who is already known to have a history of possessing child pornography, the charges are even more grave. In Pennsylvania, the crime of child pornography carries hefty penalties. But with Sayers' confession, the legal case against him has become all but airtight. He admitted to being sexually attracted to children and to distributing child sexual abuse material through cloud services, which makes his case particularly damning. But how does the law treat such admissions? Menino explains that while confessions can be powerful, they don't always guarantee an easy path to conviction. However, in this case, Sayers' admission is bolstered by the overwhelming physical evidence, the photographs, videos, and online history that leaves little room for doubt about his guilt. The evidence is so substantial here, says Menino. It's not just a matter of a confession. You have years of documented behavior. This is a clear, open and shut case. But what about Rothenhofer? How will the law treat her role in the crime? The question remains whether she will be considered a full accomplice or whether she will be treated as a victim herself. Menino points out that while Rothenhofer's claims of intoxication could potentially serve as a mitigating factor, they do not absolve her of responsibility. Voluntary intoxication is never a defense in criminal law, he states. You can't simply say, I was drunk or high, so I wasn't responsible for my actions. It might affect the sentencing, but it doesn't negate the crime. However, Menino acknowledges that Rothenhofer's involvement could be viewed differently, depending on the details of her relationship with Sayers. If it's proven that Sayers manipulated her into participating in the abuse through psychological grooming and control, her defense team may argue that she was coerced into committing the crime. This is where the case becomes more complex, he explains. If Rothenhofer was a victim of Sayers' manipulation over the years, her role could be seen in a different light. It could reduce her culpability, but it doesn't erase the crime. The emotional and psychological dynamics between the two accused will undoubtedly play a central role in the trial. If the prosecution can prove that Rothenhofer was fully complicit in the abuse, then the case against her will be even stronger. But if they can demonstrate that she was psychologically manipulated or coerced, it could potentially reduce her sentence. As the investigation progresses, legal experts predict that a plea deal might be on the table. For Sayers, whose guilt seems nearly certain, a plea deal could allow him to avoid a lengthy trial, but it may come at the cost of an even harsher sentence. It's rare that someone like Sayers gets away with anything less than the maximum sentence, says Menino. The prosecution knows this case is strong. They may offer him a deal, but it's likely to involve a lifetime in prison. Rothenhofer, too, may face similar discussions. While her defense team could attempt to argue for a reduced sentence due to her claimed intoxication or alleged manipulation, the prosecution will undoubtedly seek the maximum penalty for the damage she has caused. The emotional toll on the victims, both the 8-year-old girl and potentially others, cannot be ignored in these legal deliberations. The court will also face the difficult question of whether to make the victim testify. In cases like this, where the evidence is overwhelming, prosecutors may choose to avoid subjecting the victim to the trauma of courtroom testimony. One of the advantages of a case like this is the overwhelming physical evidence. There's no need to rely on victim testimony, says Menino. The prosecution will do everything in their power to avoid re-traumatizing the child, especially when the evidence is so clear. With such a strong legal case, it seems almost certain that Rothenhofer and Sayers will face lengthy prison sentences if convicted. But what remains to be seen is how the trial will unfold, whether there will be a plea, and what defense tactics will emerge in the coming months. For now, the community waits. The families of the victims hold their breath, and the legal experts watch closely to see how the courts will handle one of the most disturbing and heartbreaking cases they've seen in years. As if the details of the crime weren't disturbing enough, a chilling new layer of betrayal was revealed with the discovery that Morgan Rothenhofer had been employed as a daycare worker, entrusted with the care of children. The very notion that someone capable of such horror was working in a position designed to protect and nurture children sends a shockwave through the community. What makes this revelation even more unsettling is the fact that Rothenhofer's crimes were allegedly committed before her employment at the daycare. But the thought that she had been in direct contact with children in the months leading up to her arrest raises an alarming question. Could other children have been at risk? Rothenhofer was hired at Tender Years Daycare in Silver Spring Township, a position she took up on August 7th. She had claimed to have 5 years of experience nannying and working at other child care centers. At first glance, Rothenhofer seemed like a typical young woman, eager to help children grow and learn. She passed all mandatory background checks, FBI and state criminal history checks that were designed to prevent anyone with a criminal past from slipping through the cracks. And for a while, her presence at the daycare went unquestioned. But the day the news broke about her arrest, a dark truth emerged. This wasn't just a case of a random individual committing a terrible crime. This was a story of someone who had been hiding in plain sight, wearing a mask of normalcy while concealing the darkest of secrets. Rothenhofer had been working with young children, perhaps even the very ones she had once been entrusted to protect. Tender Years Daycare responded swiftly upon hearing the news. On September 12th, they terminated her employment immediately, stating that the alleged crimes had occurred before she was hired, and that there was no evidence to suggest that the children in their care had been involved. In an official statement, the daycare's legal counsel reassured parents that Rothenhofer had never worked alone with children, always being supervised. The center insisted that the situation was isolated and that no children under their care had been harmed. But even with these reassurances, the damage was done. The community was left reeling, unsure of who to trust. How could Rothenhofer, a daycare worker, be capable of such monstrosities? And what about the children she had interacted with before the allegations came to light? It was a betrayal that tore at the very fabric of trust. Parents, once assured that their children were safe under the care of trained professionals, now found themselves questioning every moment their children spent in that daycare. Could Rothenhofer have been capable of grooming or even abusing children within the walls of Tender Years? The very idea that someone who appeared to be a nurturing figure could have harbored such darkness underneath is a concept so unfathomable that it leaves the community shaken to its core. Rothenhofer's alleged actions, though taking place before her employment at the daycare, forced parents to confront the possibility that their children could have been at risk, if not from Rothenhofer herself, then from the unsettling thought that a predator was capable of slipping through the cracks of their most trusted institutions. And as the investigation continued, a horrifying thought lingered. What if there were other victims, other children, whose names might never be known? The idea that an individual could hide their true nature in plain sight, working day after day with children, was enough to make parents question every background check they had ever relied upon. How many other dangerous individuals might be out there, in positions of trust, waiting for the opportunity to strike? This new layer of betrayal didn't just change the course of the investigation, it rattled the entire community to its core. The fear, the uncertainty, and the anger were palpable as the truth began to settle in. The daycare where parents once dropped their children off with the belief that they were safe became the setting for a nightmare that no one saw coming, but everyone now feared. As the case moves forward, the question remains: will anyone else step forward, another victim perhaps, or a parent who once entrusted Rothenhofer with their child's care? The investigation into her time at tender years may be just beginning, but the emotional impact of this betrayal will last far longer. The trust that once existed between families and the daycare center has been shattered, and it may never fully recover. As the investigation unfolds and the case inches closer to trial, the looming question becomes one of legal strategy. Will Morgan Rothenhofer and Jamie Sayers face the full weight of their crimes in a courtroom, or will they attempt to negotiate their way out of the nightmare they've created? With the evidence stacked against them, many legal experts agree that a plea deal may be the most likely path forward, especially for Sayers, whose confession and the overwhelming physical evidence have made his conviction seem inevitable. For Sayers, the prospect of a plea deal could potentially reduce the number of years he would spend in prison. In a case as grim as this, where the evidence is undeniable, a plea bargain might allow him to avoid the full horror of a public trial and the added pain of forcing victims to testify. But make no mistake, any deal he could strike would still likely result in a life sentence. The evidence against him is irrefutable, says Matt Menino, a former prosecutor. Sayers has already confessed, and there's a digital trail that leads directly to him. The prosecution is in an incredibly strong position, and while a plea deal may spare him the emotional toll of a trial, it will not spare him from facing the consequences of his actions. What is clear, however, is that the plea deal would likely come with a heavy price. In exchange for reducing the sentence, Sayers would likely have to agree to a guilty plea on all counts, including the possession and distribution of child pornography and the abuse of the 8-year-old child. But there is one key point that may prevent a deal from being struck: the victims. The prosecution may refuse to offer any leniency if Sayers' actions were deemed so monstrous that even a reduced sentence would not be seen as justice for the children he's hurt. Given the nature of the crime, the prosecution may want to send a very strong message, Menino explains. It's possible that Sayers will face the maximum penalty, even if he cooperates. Rothenhofer's situation, however, is more complex. While Sayers' guilt seems almost unquestionable, Rothenhofer's role in the crime is murkier. Was she a willing accomplice in these atrocities, or was she manipulated by Sayers, a victim herself in a twisted game of control? The investigation has left many unanswered questions about her involvement. Questions that will be central to the defense strategy. Her defense team may argue that she was coerced into participating, that she was under Sayers' psychological control for years, and that her intoxication during the abuse should be considered as a mitigating factor in her sentencing. While these arguments might provide some sympathy for Rothenhofer, they're unlikely to save her from facing a lengthy prison sentence. Even if Rothenhofer was manipulated, she was still involved in the abuse, Menino notes. The prosecution will argue that she had a role in perpetrating these horrific acts, and they will seek justice for the victim. There's also the possibility that Rothenhofer could be offered a plea deal of her own. A guilty plea could allow her to avoid a full trial, but it would still likely result in a lengthy sentence. For both Rothenhofer and Sayers, the charges they face are so serious that, regardless of the plea deals, they would likely spend the rest of their lives in prison. The only real question left is whether the prosecution will push for the maximum penalty, or if some form of leniency will be shown. particularly given Rothenhofer's potential defense of psychological manipulation and intoxication. But no matter what happens in the legal negotiations, one fact remains indisputable: the victims. The 8-year-old child whose life was forever altered by this abuse, and possibly others yet to be discovered, will carry the weight of this trauma for years to come. Their suffering will not be erased, and no plea deal can undo the horror they've endured. While the future of Rothenhofer and Sayers hangs in the balance, the pain left behind by their actions is an enduring truth that no court ruling can ever truly heal. As the case moves closer to trial, the community remains on edge, waiting for the outcome. Will there be a plea deal, or will this case go to trial in all its grisly detail? What will the final sentences be? One thing is certain: whatever the outcome, the consequences for these two accused individuals will be life-altering, and the ripples of their actions will be felt for years to come. The question isn't just about what will happen to them, but what will become of the victims, and how much justice can truly be served when the damage is this profound. As the investigation into Morgan Rothenhofer and Jamie Sayers continues to unfold, one thing is certain: the chilling details of this case will continue to haunt the community for years to come. The lives of the victims, especially that of the 8-year-old child at the heart of this tragedy, have been irrevocably altered. The scars they bear, physical, emotional, and psychological, will last a lifetime. And for Rothenhofer and Sayers, whatever the outcome of their trial, their futures will be forever changed. But will it be enough? Can any sentence truly account for the suffering they've caused? The question of justice lingers in the air. The case against Rothenhofer and Sayers serves as a stark reminder of the dark truths that can hide in plain sight. It forces us to confront uncomfortable realities: how trust can be betrayed, how evil can lurk behind the most innocent faces, and how some predators are skilled at manipulating those around them. The horror of their crimes isn't just in what they did. It's in how they managed to conceal it for so long, until the law, through an anonymous tip, finally brought them to justice. But even then, the question remains: how many more could there be? As this case moves forward, the community watches, the victims wait for justice, and the legal system wrestles with how to properly address such unthinkable acts. But the questions won't be easily answered. Will Sayers take a plea deal, or will he face the full extent of the law? Will Rothenhofer be seen as a victim of manipulation, or will she be judged as an active perpetrator? And will there be more victims, more children whose lives were stolen in the darkness of Sayers' twisted world? We'll continue to follow this case closely as the answers to these questions begin to take shape. In the meantime, we urge you to stay informed, stay aware, and remember the victims whose voices so often go unheard in cases like these. If you're looking for more updates on this story and others like it, be sure to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss any critical developments. Like and share this video to keep the conversation going, because stories like these demand to be heard. And the more people who know the truth, the harder it is for darkness to thrive in the shadows. Thank you for watching, and as always, stay vigilant. Justice may be slow, but it is always worth pursuing.